So you've got your idea and you want to go, but what you need to do now is research it. And I think for me, this is the fun part. This is when you start getting the maps out on your globe and you start to pick out routes and stories, etc. And so research is really, really important for me because you need to decide where to go and what are you going to do when you go there. To a degree, there's a sense of freedom in an adventure. So you don't want to have everything carved out in such a way that it takes the fun and spontaneity out of your trip. But if you're going to be crossing borders and if you're going to be going through areas where you need to get permission, one thing you don't really want to do is be held up unnecessarily because you haven't looked at the problems before you leave home. So actually having a researcher that's inquisitive, that can actually look for exciting things to film, make sure that you're actually going on a route that's safe, but also predict where problems might crop up where you don't want them to, I think is very, very fundamental. Of course, it's a budgetary issue, so you might want to do it all yourself because you're just going on your own. But if you do have a team of people, you certainly want one or two researchers in there that actually start to sort of predict where the good stuff is and where the bad stuff might be. I think it's quite important at this point to mention also the dynamic of the team and how your ideas need to match their personalities. Because if somebody's taking too long over something and everybody else wants to move on, you've already got a problem within that dynamic. So it's worthwhile making sure that the ideas that you research, the schedule that you're putting together is actually okay, certainly with your talent, whoever's in front of the camera, but it also fits in with your capabilities with regard to your budget and also the personnel that you have within your team. It's a difficult thing to get right, but it does make your trip ultimately more fun when you do it. And it also makes you a little bit more comfortable with being able to deliver the final product. Any delay, if we didn't get these visas and we had to wait till Monday to get them, then we'd be in trouble. You know that?
Yeah, I know.
Well, I'm going to have a quick coffee here because I want to touch the sea. We haven't been near the sea yet.
The Iranians won't give us our visas in London for a bureaucratic reason. I don't know what it is.
Oh, there's oil everywhere. Yuck.
So we've got to try and get them issued in either Georgia or Azerbaijan. And that's not a given.
I've just spoken to Russ about the Iranian visa situation, and it's not good, to be honest. I don't know how they're going to get to India now. We know we can't get into Uzbekistan because it's a closed country. Iraq, don't even go there. Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia is an absolute minefield. So the only alternative we've got really is to go through Iran and then get a boat from Dubai to India.
Well, we've decided to take a boat to get to India from Dubai, and we booked it for the 12th of May, and that's pretty well set in stone. I'm sure this is just a bureaucratic problem, but the problem with bureaucracy is it can take days to solve. Crazy. And that sort of leads into your schedule, because I think we've done this before where you become a bit over-optimistic about the amount of ground that you can cover in a day. And if you've cleared a certain amount of time for your adventure because your families are expecting you home or other people have got other commitments afterwards, and you want to be able to get everything finished to make your show, you do need to make sure that the time that you've allowed per day is enough to get the filming done that you need to get done and yet to get between the points where you want to go. I would suggest at this point as well that you make sure that you allow a bit of a buffer in your schedule for safety, because when things go wrong, you don't want to be playing catch up. Because it's also worth pointing out at this point in the edit, when you do an expedition, it depends the nature of your show, but generally speaking, you can't cheat anything and you don't want to, but there's no way you can suddenly move one country in front of another because they're going to have to be geographically and chronologically accurate. So you have to make sure that you've got enough content that you want to film, enough time to film it, and yet give yourself the freedom to be able to make stuff up spontaneously on the trip. So it's a big ask. It's fun, but it's worthwhile thinking about. It's probably the least fun side of research, but it's also worth looking at things like permits. So if you're going to go to certain locations, you need to have got permits to film before you go there. Because when you arrive at a place where you want to film and you haven't got the permits, it can be very upsetting because you're all excited to go to this place and you just can't do it. The other thing to do is check that something similar hasn't been done before. And that's very difficult nowadays because most people have gone off and done many, many things. And of course, you may have the advantage of a great celebrity who's going with you that gives it a different perspective. But it is worthwhile just double checking that something hasn't been done before, so that when you shape your idea and it's presented to the broadcaster or your funder, at least you can actually say this is your new idea and actually come up with something that is likely to be financed. So that's why you need a good research team. You need people that are inquisitive, that have a good eye to detail, that are excited by the project as well, and can also, think left field, that they bring ideas to you that you hadn't thought of yourself. Difficult to find, but not impossible. Of course, if it's worth encouraging your talent, your celebrities as well, if they have an idea, to get them involved in the research as well, just because it actually gives that personal touch. And again, always feel free to film that process, because I think there's nothing more exciting than getting a map out with your coloured pens and the people over the top of the map drawing on it and deciding where they're going to go. And then eventually you end up there. So an extension of research, and it's a very sort of sensitive area, this one, because generally speaking, I don't think we're in favour of doing reconnaissance trips, because in some senses it takes the discovery out of the situation. But sometimes you have to, either for safety or just reassurance that what you're looking to do is actually there. So as an example of that, I worked with David Beckham on a show where he wanted to play 7 football matches on 7 continents, almost in 7 days. So I did go to Papua New Guinea because we needed to make sure that there was a football pitch available to play with the local people. And Nepal in amongst the temples, Djibouti with the refugees, etc., and even to get to Antarctica. So I felt I had to do that because we were on a time frame. And that leads me on to another point, which I think it's very helpful if you've got the budget, or to a degree, even if you haven't, I'll explain in a minute why, to have local producers, or in the old days, I used to call them fixers. But that's somebody in country who understands the politics, who understands the sensitivities and the bureaucracy of helping to facilitate your journey through the country, but also to come up with ideas. Because it's all very well you researching from home, but when you get on the ground, you need somebody that really knows what they're talking about to help make happen what you want to have happen. And the other area, of course, is in translation. So depending on where you are, you might help, or will certainly need help in translating the local language back into, if it's English for your show, that's where they can help. So I would thoroughly recommend it. Now, as I said, if you don't specifically have the budget, there are still people out there that live in a country that would love to help you, or friends of a friend. And we've done that before. They live there and they can automatically tell you where you shouldn't go, where you should go, and if they can help facilitate contacts with, people in the tourism authority, etc. So I would highly recommend that if you can actually make that happen. It's probably worth thinking about at the research stage as to whether or not you're going to have a website going live during your trip. This is something you'll have to discuss with the broadcaster. But if you're going to do that, you need to start building it fairly early on as to what it is that you're going to be doing. Now, you might just put your trip up on Twitter and Facebook, etc. But we have built websites in the past, and they take a long time to put together. And if it's something that you're excited about doing, which shows your progress and the stories that you're doing, but you need to think about it at this stage fairly early on. But you may not want to do it to give the game away, but it's certainly worth putting in the back of your mind. One really important area, and I haven't left it to last, it's just in the mix, is safety and security. So during your research, it's really important to just make sure that where you're going is safe, where you're going to stay, or if you've got sort of thoughts about a particular route, is secure. It's really difficult to get that exactly right, but it is definitely worth looking into and asking your local producers for their advice. Because although I love adventure, and there's a degree of adventure where you're outside your comfort zone, no one wants to get hurt. We've never started an adventure thinking, it's fun to put our lives at risk or even our health at risk. And at the research point, you can nip some of that in the bud. So as part of this process, it's always important, I think, anyway, to have fun and variety on your expedition, but it certainly works from a TV point of view. And an example of that might be, where do we stay? Of course, it's lovely to stay in a hotel if you've just had a sweaty day in a jungle, but from a TV point of view, and also from your team dynamic, it's also lovely to camp. You know, you get those wonderful moments of trying to pick the camping site, putting the tents up, lighting the fire, cooking, but you get all of the chat and the camaraderie around that sort of entity. And of course, in the morning, you get those great bedhead shots when people come out and look dreadful, but you get a lot of great emotion about how important that's been to them. It's also worth noting at this point, balancing your expectations out in the research stage with the budget that you've got available. And sometimes camping and staying in hostels, although they give great content, they also save some money in the bigger picture. So it's just worthwhile looking at those all at the research stage, because it just ends up as being a more fun trip and gives you a greater, more content for your show. It's very important that you keep the excitement for your project going. But it's also worth bearing in mind possibly what the broadcasters might be looking for within it to help them make them say yes. And in that sense, you might want to think about some takeout information for the countries that you're going through, because it also shows a respect for the people in the countries that you go through. So if you're going somewhere historic, you can make sure that you're giving that information to your presenters so that they can say it at the time. Because it also shows that they've invested in the culture that they're going through, as opposed to just doing it on voiceover back in your edit, which of course is much easier. But the other route shows, I think, that you've actually got a genuine empathy with the culture that you're going through. On a slightly more practical note, it's also worth asking your researchers to look at the weather where you're going, and whether or not that will actually hinder or impact your expedition. You might want to go anyway. And in fact, when we did Long Way Up, because we called it Long Way Up, we had to start at the bottom of South America in the winter, and we hadn't predicted the snow that we came across. So in that situation, we couldn't do anything about it. But it is worth looking at the temperature, snow, humidity, highs and lows, because that actually could shape how you're going to pack your equipment and how you're actually going to deal with the trip from a health and safety point of view as well. But it's very important at the research stage just to make sure that you have fun and that you really look forward to this trip, because at the end of the day, a lot of these trips are trips of a lifetime, and you've got the opportunity here to shape it to work for everybody.